What's cooking, folks? Vermillion Phoenix here, and today what I wanted to do was to jump into a quick video about traits. Now, there are a lot of traits in the game. Haven't actually tallied up the exact number, but there's a good amount. So what I've decided to do, because I've done dry runs of this and just trying to go through all of the traits turns into like an hour-long video that would be a pain to actually go through without just having like timestamps for each specific section or each specific trait. I'm not going to go into a ton of super detail here, but I want to give people a general idea about what traits they could be using. And I apologize, but I don't actually have the information in front of me as far as when the traits unlock, because that's going to be another factor in choosing what traits you have, because you won't be able to get certain traits until you actually get to Rift Lord, the final difficulty of the game. Either way, I am still missing one Pentagon trait, and Pentagon traits are what we're going to be focusing on today. So that is Paging Dr. Love. Now, Paging Dr. Love and Amateur Veterinarian do have a bit of overlap in the way that they function, and there's a very few specific cases where one doesn't work and the other does, but that's something I'll have to get into specifics on at a later time. But again, let's just kind of jump into this so you guys will actually see what I'm on about. So Pentagon traits, for the most part, are going to improve the damage dealt by your hero and character. This includes the traps that you have in your loadout and the damage dealt by your hero themselves. There's a specific subset of slot matching bonuses that you'll get on Pentagon traits, and I think there's about 4 different ones. They're roughly all the same, but there's 8% max mana, which, since there's no mana reliant damage or anything now, isn't that big of a deal for the majority of characters, except for maybe Cygnus, since it literally determines the amount of attacks he'll be able to do without recharging his mana. As long as you have something equipped to make sure that his mana is regenerating constantly, like siphons or gear that regenerates his mana, you should be ultimately fine there. But max mana is probably one of the least useful ones in my opinion, just because there are so many ways to restore your mana, and increasing your mana gives you no other benefit than not having to restore it as often, which isn't quite the same as having some sort of restorative ability or, just more restoration. You always want it to come back faster than you spend it. Having more of it to spend does not necessarily benefit you in any great way. Then one of my favorite bonuses is going to be 10% cooldown speed. 10% cooldown speed is great because what this does is, off of the top, it takes 10% of the cooldowns of any of your abilities that have cooldowns and reduces them immediately upon use. This means that something that took 10 seconds now takes 9 to be able to activate again. Anything that took 60 seconds now takes 54. This is going to benefit extremely long cooldown abilities such as Deadeye's Ready Steady Fire, even abilities that have slightly long cooldowns but not something that's super long, like say Cygnus's Rift Shard, which is about 30-35 seconds. It was originally 35 seconds, it's 30 now. It was patched recently. But yeah, 30 seconds is going to take 3 seconds off the top. Now, ultimately what this is going to do is, on castables that have a certain amount of uptime, it's going to increase the amount of uptime versus downtime you have, as long as you manage your character's mobility and activations of skills well. You'll be able to essentially squeeze out more damage from your hero than you would otherwise. And for abilities that are crowd control heavy, or that are just straight crowd control, you will be able to cast those more often, ultimately giving your traps more power because enemies are stuck in their sort of threat area longer. So there's a lot of good things about cooldown reduction. This is one of the very few ways in the game to get it, the other ones being a consumable and I believe a Guardian Aura from the bartender, or Guzzlebutt as some of the streamers like to call him. But yeah, like Cooldown reduction is very strong. It is one of the abilities that the developers seem to pay a lot of attention to, because it has historically made some skills very powerful, probably more so than intended. And so, you know, if something's powerful and they see the need to balance around it, that probably means that it's a good idea to have it. Then one of the other traits is going to be primary attack damage. Now this comes on a lot of the traits that you're able to obtain early on into Apprentice. So most of the traits that you pick up in Apprentice are going to have primary attack damage, I believe. So it's a good idea to make sure that as soon as you get a Pentagon trait, if it has primary attack damage, that you put it on, because your primary attack for the most part is going to be where a lot of your character damage comes from, especially in the early parts of the game. So, you know, before you learn a lot about the characters, you're probably just going to be left clicking all over the place, and it's a good idea to just do it better. So this slot matching bonus stacks with any of the damage bonuses you get from other skills. So it's a good idea that if you need to deal a lot of damage to a specific type of target, let's say you're playing Endless or something like that, and you need to make sure that you know, giants die quicker because they are causing you a specific problem, then, you know, you can slot the Uncle Killed by Giant and a different bonus to not get the slot matching bonus to earn your, you know, multi-purpose slot and still get the additional primary attack damage from another trait. So, you know, if you absolutely need to deal a ton of damage to that particular enemy type, there are ways to go about doing it. And you'll find that in a lot of Endless missions, it's going to be the heavy enemies, those that are physics resistant, and you know, as they're given additional health or the health scales up, they're going to be the problems that you'll have to deal with, more so than the lighter minions, which can be controlled via physics. They generally have less HP and AoE abilities and damage. Pretty much going to wreck those a lot easier. And I think for the most part, is that it here? Yeah, it looks like this one only has 3. It's not the case with some of the others. So you got cooldown speed, primary attack damage, and max mana. Overall, because if you're looking for damage only in this slot, you can get something like Feeling Fierce later on, which gives you a combination of cooldown speed and increased damage, or Bear Hugs, which is similar but functions as like a sort of an aura around your hero. Those are probably the two that I recommend taking the most often, just because they sort of fit the playstyle of your hero, so it's not like you're really going to be missing out on anything. As long as it works within that hero's playstyle, you're really just going to get, you know, benefits from having it on. Whereas with the other ones, you sort of have to try to, you know, micromanage your time so that you're always dealing damage to the most effective targets. It's probably a bit more important when you're dealing with a multiplayer situation to specialize your damage rather than have something that just benefits everything. But for the most part, these are useful. Well, Feeling Fierce and Bear Hugs are useful all the time. You get your cooldown bonus, you get your extra damage, they're just good. Now, the other ones can be useful, again, like in those very niche situations. Uncle Killed by Giants is going to be better against the Order enemies because that's where the Giants are. Sister Eaten by an Ogre is going to be better against Unchained, and also the Frostmun, or the Ice Ogres, Ice Orcs. That's the faction that includes the Ice Elemental enemies there. Then you have the Northmun, which are the Barbarians or Ice Soldiers. And those, they seem to have like really mixed enemies in the ice groups. So I'm not sure exactly what's in there. I have to probably look at those maps a bit more. Killer Buzz is another relatively early damage dealing skill that you can get that will give you a buff on killing enemies. It's really good when you are either over leveled or you have a character that has some burst damage abilities. to get a lot of damage on your hero quickly, because you get the primary attack bonus here, and you also get a global 8% damage bonus for 3 seconds after each kill. It refreshes, but it does not stack, so it is a very good damage ability. Amateur Veterinarian, if this works the way I believe it does, or at least it should, just because there's a lot of sort of changes and inconsistencies with healing in the game, this makes it so that healing cast on you from an outside source should be boosted. Or healing abilities, it doesn't have to be an outside source, it can be you. But of the characters that are currently in the game that can heal themselves, I think there's Ivy and Oziel. I have not tested this on Oziel specifically, but it should work. His healing, however, is extremely weak. It's 4% of his health, and this would give you a 10% boost, so you would slot this for 4.4%. I mean, you could also just slot the 10% extra damage and get the same bonus. So this I don't feel is really strong for him. The 8% max mana also will not scale with Oziel's increasing mana per level. So this ability really seems very niche, and some sort of survival situation, maybe an endless, where you're playing with multiple people and somebody's picking a support role. So you allow the support role to heal your teammates better, but ultimately I think there's just significantly better solutions, and you really don't need to buff things like healing wells that often. Like, they're pretty strong. I don't really see this trait as being super important, mainly because there's nobody that has a health pool that's large enough to really take advantage of it. I mean, there's Hogarth, but most of the healing in the game is percentage based, and most of them are gonna clock in somewhere around 50% base before bonuses. After the bonuses, you're getting like 2/3 to like 100% of your health back. And again, there's really not too big of a point to go over whatever your max health is in healing, just because you can't overheal. Now, if there was some sort of overhealing mechanic that was added to the game that got you, you know, additional shields or like bonus armor HP, or I don't know, something like that, then this will probably become a very interesting skill or trait. But nothing in the game exists like that right now, although if somebody decided that they wanted to make that a mechanic at Robot, that would be interesting, and I leave that up to your discretion. Bear Hugs, I've touched on a bit. It is primarily going to be your damage dealing trait of choice for melee heroes, in my opinion. You have the bonus damage to anything near you. If I remember correctly, the way that this works is actually as a damage or armor reduction, so it actually should increase the damage of other things around you, not just your hero. So, and it's because of the wording. It's plus 8% damage to minions near the hero. So yeah, it seems like a really good skill. It works when you're in parties, it works for your traps. It's just overall like excellent. And because a lot of melee characters have skills that have relatively long cooldowns historically, it's just really nice. You can stack this with Feeling Fierce for a lot of damage, and you can't get the slot matching bonus twice, of course, so you won't be able to get the bonus cooldown reduction. But either way, you can max them up for a good amount of damage globally, and then also take, you know, because you have 4 trait slots, additional target specific damage bonuses like Brother Mauled by Grizzlies to deal a lot of damage to Grizzlies, and that would give you around 30% bonus damage to Grizzlies. Now, I believe that these stack additively. I still haven't tested those that specifically yet, because if they stack additively, that's pretty good. If they stack multiplicatively, it's even better. But that remains to be determined. Either way, we're gonna move from that to something a little different. This is Believe Size Matters. And if you're not familiar with this, this is a trait that increases your primary attack damage only to large minions and only while Unchained. Now, before the changes to Unchained way back, this was probably a much better trait than it is now, but a situational 15% primary attack only damage boost really doesn't beat a situational 8 or 10% boost that happens both Unchained and not Unchained. Since for the majority of characters, you're really not going to spend a lot of time Unchained, and you have a limited number of times that you can Unchain per match based on how good your combos are, and you know, basically because it gets harder to Unchain every time you activate the mechanic. So it's important to understand that, you know, Unchaining is really good at, you know, allowing you to recast your abilities, but it's not something that you want to focus a damage trait on. What I would do is I would probably significantly boost this. I mean, even the 25% when team is Unchained is pretty good, but I would probably change this to maybe 25 and 40. That way, it would be like a significant reason to focus on being Unchained and making sure that that's really like, you know, a trump card when something happens in the middle of the game. Brother Mauled by Grizzlies is pretty much just damage bonus trait against Grizzlies. Now, it should be mentioned that this works against any type of Grizzly. So if it's a regular Grizzly, bonus damage. Armored Grizzly, bonus damage. Polar Bear, still a Grizzly. Get the damage up. Cat eaten by Gnoll is the same thing for Gnolls. Gnolls tend to not have that much health, but if you're in something like Sabotage, where they don't normally spawn, this could give you some extra damage, but since they have to come from cards, probably still not worth your time. You're better off with global damage boost. But it is there if you find that Gnolls are being a problem, either while you're in the survival battlegrounds or in Endless. So that's a good choice. Also, this can be supplemented just with big game hunting traps because they now target any sort of hunters, and all Gnolls are hunters. So yeah, I'm not sure. The usefulness of this trap is pretty much gone with the big game hunting traps, and with you having 7 trap slots versus 4 traits, I think that the leeway there with the versatility of the big game hunting traps is such that this trait is kind of pointless right now. I will probably see it change to something a bit different in the future. Not sure what though. Difficulty calming down. This is actually one of my favorite traits. I don't use it a ton when making videos, mainly because it's really not necessary, but for characters that have like traits that function when they're Unchained or that may benefit from being Unchained, this is actually really nice. It increases your Unchained duration by 15%. I believe Bianca also has a Weaver that allows her to go Unchained for a longer period of time, and that makes it so that you can stay Unchained for a really long time, really ramping up the damage and the rate that you can activate your abilities. So this is actually really nice, and if you get your hands on it, you know, feel free to play around with it. I think it's a good trait. It might need a slight buff again, just because of the way that the Unchained mechanics work now. It actually is probably most useful when you happen to get an increased Unchained drop on a Chaos Trial. That's probably going to be where it is going to see the most use, but otherwise you're probably better off with a damage bonus, depending on what kind of hero you're running. If you're playing with Gabriella, damage bonus might not be that big of a deal. Probably want to focus on crowd control stuff, but it has the cooldown speed there too, so again, just a really good trait. This is basically Cat eaten by Gnoll, only for Pride Hunter minions. There's only one type of Pride Hunter minion, so it's a little less versatile. Maybe when the devs decide to add Pride Hunters of a different variety rather than just the ones that hunt you and smack you with a poleaxe, this will see a bit more use, but again, since they also count as hunters and they can be taken out by big game hunting traps, I'm not going to see this one as being too useful. Feeling Fierce is effectively the ranged version of Bear Hugs. It is not recommended on melee characters unless they have some sort of life steal, because it only works when you're above half health. This used to work 100% of the time, but was patched because it was way too dominant a trait, and it is still really, really, really good. Grandmother Eaten by Troll. This actually is kind of an important trait. Even though it's similar to the Grizzlies, because Trolls are some of the healthiest minions in the game, and they have the ability to regenerate their health when they stop taking damage for a set period of time. If you have Trolls that are not taking damage and traveling through the map, you need to get their health down to 0 as soon as possible. So because they're such a significant threat and have such a high amount of HP, this is actually a pretty solid trait to have. Then we have Has a Big Brother. If you like fighting your Guardians, this trait is for you. It's an additional 10% damage dealt to minions near Guardians. For the most part, this works better when you have multiple players in the game because of your ability to have 6 Guardians. Hopefully, I mean, the Guardian system and it being limited to multiple players is kind of an issue in the game right now. Basically, having more players means you have better defenses because you have more Guardians. I believe there has been feedback to developers about that, and if that changes, then this will become an even more important trait. But either way, damage increases are always really nice. This specifies damage and not hero damage, so I believe this should benefit traps, but again, more testing is needed. Has an ultimate set of tools, literally just increases your trap damage. That's not bad at all. Its slot matching bonus also increases the primary attack damage on your hero for heroes that have amazingly strong primary attacks and do really good with trap support. Since everybody's going to place traps, there's no reason not to not love this trait. It's not a ton of damage, but you have to realize that you get to place on average a maximum of about 85 traps to 100 traps a map. This is basically like saying you get 6 more traps. It's really good. It's probably not going to break the bank, but it's a really nice trait to have. Killer Buzz, I already touched on. Good trait, especially if you need to stack your damage. Stacks on top of other damage traits. It's good. Rift Away. Rift Away allows you to deal extra damage to unstable rifts. For the most part, most characters that have any sort of high damage one-shot attacks will not need this, but characters like Gabriella, Ivy, and other people who do not have any high damage abilities would benefit from Rift Away. Now, currently, I don't believe the unstable rifts are in a position where they're super threatening on maps unless you, for whatever reason, have an issue where the audio call out gets missed while playing, or it just doesn't show up on the map until, you know, such time as it is about to open, which are glitches that I've encountered. Then it might be an issue for your hero, but for the most part, as long as you're within any sort of reasonable distance, Rift Away really isn't going to change much if your hero already has a solid way of dealing damage. That said, it's not a bad trait, but I'm not going to recommend it as being something that's super useful for a lot of people, just because there's so many ways to deal damage, including gear, which is just, it kind of makes this less useful than it should be. Now keep in mind, for Chaos Trials does force this to be a little bit more useful, because the greater rifts, or I'm sorry, not the greater rifts, but the, oh geez, I'm talking Diablo 3 now. The unstable rifts do have increased or scaling HP. And what that means is that as you progress through your Chaos Trials, the rifts get stronger, and you may consider taking this if you have increased unstable rifts, as the increased unstable rifts are going to spawn more enemies. The enemies are random. It can cause a whole lot of chaos. So again, the trait is not bad. It has very niche uses, but when it's useful, it's useful. Alright, and then we have Sister Eaten by an Ogre. Again, same as the other specialized traits. except this one's more akin to Grandmother Eaten by Troll, whereas these are heavy enemies. In Endless, they become a threat, so it's a good idea to stack damage against them. Not a bad trait. Soldiers took my horse. I'm on the fence about this one. I think that this trait actually is maybe one of the worst designed ones in the game, and it's mainly because soldiers don't have a ton of HP. Also, soldiers have an ability that reduces your damage to pretty much a flat 20 points after they hit certain HP thresholds. Now, I believe most of the bugs with soldiers have been ironed out. I haven't found any new ones recently, but basically once they hit that 20 HP point, 12% extra damage is going to be applied to that 20 HP from all the damage bonuses I've seen. Even Cygnus, his 100% extra damage from his Rift Shard or being near the Rift turns his 20 damage into about 40. So basically this doesn't actually remove the number of hits it takes to kill a soldier unless you're underleveled and playing at a point when the soldiers have like really high HP, like maybe Chaos Trials or Endless. So I don't really see this as being a super useful trait, especially since all soldiers are light, they can be handled by physics, and you're really going to be worried about giants on any stage that has soldiers, either giants or armored grizzlies. So I don't see this trait as being useful unless you literally have nothing else. And that's not going to be common for long. Then we have Tries Too Hard. This is 10% damage dealt to mercenaries near your guardians. Now, I'm not sure how often you're going to be fighting mercenaries near your guardians, but mercenaries don't attack guardians from what I've seen. They basically only hate the hero or set up crystals to disable your traps in the case of the Chaos Kobold. If they were to, oh no, this is not true. The Null Breeder can't attack the Guardian specifically, so unless you can like sort of lure the mercenaries to your Guardians to deal damage, or your Guardians literally just in the enemy escort path, this one may or may not be useful to you. I mean, your mileage may vary, but I don't think it's a bad trait. Again, because of the versatility of the way that most maps can be laid out and how your pathing can go. If you path the enemies to your Guardian, the mercenaries are going to go with them. It's just that you're going to have to try to kill the mercenaries near your Guardian, and that sort of limited range, and the fact that I don't think they tell you what the range on this is specifically, sort of makes this kind of hard to determine. So I put this in the less useful traits if I needed to categorize it, but it doesn't seem like a bad idea, especially if you have issues with mercenaries. And historically, the Null Breeder has been a problem. Then we have Uncle Killed by Giants, you know, pretty much same as most of the other I hate this enemy traits. This one will allow you to murder giants really hard, and it's probably going to be needed if you plan on getting to, you know, particularly long waves in Endless, at least when giants are present, which would be like Throne Room. But that's most of the Pentagon traits. Again, don't have Paging Dr. Love. This one is probably going to be a support character, like archetype heavy trait. If they have support abilities that heal people around you, then this is going to benefit that. And other than characters like Ivy right now, really don't see this being useful on anyone else. So if you like playing Ivy and you really like keeping people alive, maybe give this a try. But since they changed her heal to be based on a percentage of your your teammates' life, I don't really see this as being super important now. I mean, sure, you can get a full heal, but if you manage to like just stick with them, since Ivy's move speed is pretty solid, you can just max heal them anyway, and you still do have to be kind of close to Ivy. Either way, that's all of the Pentagon traits. This was still a half an hour, so you can understand why I do not want to lump the other traits in together. Let me know what you guys think about the traits, if you think my assessment's off on any of them. If there's any that need like a very specific details and explanation, I might try to get a video put out in the future. It's not planned anytime near, because there's a lot of other stuff going on with the game that I'll talk about. But either way, I hope this helps you guys out. I sincerely appreciate you for watching, and as always, until next time, have a good one, folks.